Today's date is July the 10th, 2013. I am visiting with Bryant Rickman, who lives about 8 miles south of Antlers, Oklahoma. And we're near Antlers in Pushmataha County. And this is Bill Welge for the Oklahoma Historical Society. Bryant, where and when were you born?
I was born in McKinney, Texas, Collin County,
Huh?
August the 15th, 1947.
Okay. And did you go to school there in McKinney, Texas?
No, I didn't go to school there. I went for a short time at Princeton, Texas, but my mother being from up here in Oklahoma, I started the first grade over here at Messer, and that's where I did most of my grade school, and then graduated at Hugo High School. Went 2 years to Eastern Oklahoma A&M College at Wilburton, and then I got my degree in agriculture education from East Texas State University at Commerce, which is now part of A&M.
And you said your grade school was at Messer?
Messer.
Where is that located?
It's halfway between Rattan,
Okay.
Oklahoma, and Hugo,
Okay.
off Highway 93.
Is there anything left of the community today, or is it?
Not much. We have a couple of churches there, and have a rural fire department, and just a little small settlement of people. The last big tornado that we had came through and wiped out our old schoolhouse, which
Oh, really?
which was at that time a community store. You know.
Okay. Well, and the school that you went there when you were there, was it a sizable school, or was it a small school, or?
It was small. It had 3 rooms, and we had the first through 8th grade
Okay.
in 3 rooms. So several, we were divided up 3 different grades in one classroom sometimes.
I see. And how far from the school did you live from there?
I lived about 5 miles from the school.
And did the bus take you to and from, or did you ride a horse, or?
No, a bus. We had a school bus.
Okay.
Now, in my high school years, we rode a bus all but for a mile, and we had to walk that mile. And then I rode my horse, my little Choctaw horse, another mile to work for a guy, Calvin Gilbert, that lived at Ada, Oklahoma, and had a place that joined ours. And I did ride my horse a mile each way, every evening for 5 or 6 years.
And you say you worked for him? What did you do?
Well, I fed his cattle for him mainly, and I started doing that when I was in the 7th grade, and did it after I graduated. Until I graduated out of high school, and whatever needed done, I patched fence and just was company to him, and when he would come down, and I felt like I was a big ranch foreman, Yeah.
Did I guess he paid you to do that, or did you just do it to get the experience?
No, he paid me. I made 40 cents an hour working for him for 3 years. Then I got graduated up to 50 cents an hour. In the last few years, people always told me that I worked way too cheap. No, that he was taking advantage of me, but I never saw it that way. I saw it as an opportunity to save some money and get me some cattle and horses, and that's what I did. I'd go for 3 to 6 months and not get paid, and then I'd have enough to do something. And he let me keep my own time, and he told me to always put down a minimum of 2.5 hours, whether it took me that long or not, to go over and feed for him every evening, So he was paying me $1 a day to do that, and to me, that was good, and it kept me busy, and
Sure.
like I say, gave me a self-worth,
Well, it built your obviously it built your interest too, in later on in wanting to be your own, have your own ranch and work cattle and horses.
Yeah.
Now you taught. Did you not teach after you finished college? You taught it in public schools.
Yes, which it's kind of unusual, but I went back to my hometown where I graduated high school, and I worked there for 31 years until I retired in 2000, where I could spend more time with the horses and all.
Okay. And so you you were the agricultural teacher at that time at the Hugo's Public Schools?
Yes, I took my old teacher's, the one that taught me, and he is the total reason I went to college. He come and got me out of the watermelon patch and told me I was going to enroll in college, and
Oh.
and I couldn't let him down, so
What was his name?
Robert Massingale.
Massingale, okay.
Yeah.
And he was a long-time teacher there at Hugo?
Yes, he taught 34 years there, and he was originally from over in the Boswell community, and his sister was the home ec teacher there, so
Oh, I see.
they were very well respected, and her husband was one of the first highway patrols in the state of Oklahoma,
Really?
and later become our county sheriff and all of that, so they were well-known people. That was Ed Vandergriff.
I see. Well, now, when you retired, and you said early on you had a Choctaw pony. How did you come about getting that Choctaw pony when you were a kid?
Well, I guess it goes back to my mother was always from here around the Comanche River area and the Messer area, but she had a sister that lived down in Princeton, Texas, in Collin County, and my Aunt Mildred lived down there, and my mother going down there to see her met my dad, and he had an accident there at McKinney when I was 4 years old, and it killed him on the job working, and it wasn't too long after that she met my stepdad. That's been my dad to me, Otis Colanger, forever, and Mama wanted to come back home, back to Hugo.
And what was her name?
Her name was Mary Freeman. Everybody called her Sadie.
Okay.
And she's still there. She still thinks she's got a can. She's 85 years old, and she's canning or doing something all the time, And but she wanted to come back. So my new dad brought us back up here, and at one brief time we moved back down to Texas, but didn't stay but 6 months or so, and came right back up here because the kids, all three of us, we just loved it up here. I've got two other brothers, and so that it became our home. Where my mother's home was
Sure.
our home then.
Well, now, are you the oldest, or where do you rank
I'm the middle one.
middle child?
Yeah.
Okay. And who are your two brothers? Who are their names?
Butch is my older brother, and my younger brother was Milton
Okay.
Rickman, and we lost Milton back in September.
Oh, really?
And,
Sorry.
And yeah.
Well, now, the Choctaw pony, how did you acquire that?
Okay. When we moved back up here, we had bought a little place over in the Second Ward at Hugo, and we become acquainted with a man that's actually had some land just not very far from where we are today, and he was wanting to move to town. They were getting old, so we ended up swapping our place in town when I was four years old at that time, for 40 acres and a mare and a mule. We got in this deal, a one-eyed mule, and this old mare was a work mare. She was real gentle and everything. So I guess we'd have to say she was probably our first horse. But my dad immediately traded her for two Choctaw unbroke ponies, and one of those we still have descendants of today.
Really?
of one of those, and one that we called Old Bird, and each one of us kids had our own horse from her, and that's, you know, we were kind of intimidated. I was riding my little mare, and all my friends rode bigger horses, nice quarter horses, you know, bigger hips and
Sure.
and wider fronted, and they thought more athletic, but they really wasn't that much more athletic. But that was the norm and the thinking, and it made me feel inferior anyway. And I always said, I kept her all up through my childhood, and till I started to college, I still had my same little mare,
Mm-hmm.
and we had bred the one that we had traded for. We had bred her to a solid white pure Choctaw stallion, and raised my little mare,
Mm-hmm.
which was named Chris. And when I was going to college, I needed a little extra money, and I had an uncle that had moved back here from California that had grandkids that didn't know how to ride or anything, and they were very concerned about their safety, and so I let my uncle have her and two other of my horses at that time while I was in my second year in college, and I always said that when I got old enough, got me a job, I'd have some of the best quarter horses that I could get, and I did. When I started teaching, first thing I started doing is trying to find me some dock bar type horses, cutting blood, you know, and sand peppy and some of the Leo stuff. I just really wanted quarter horses because my friends that I went to school with always had a bigger horse than I did, and I thought big was what I needed, you know. And I was very happy with them, and I had about 16 head of registered quarter horses. When I made the move, when my kids got old enough to start riding, I just wasn't ever satisfied with them riding what I had for them to ride, and I told my wife, you know, I need something like old Chris. I need her back. I got to go talk to Uncle Clarence, even though she's really old. I got to try to get her back for my oldest son to ride, and he had fell in love with her just like I did as a child. And even though she'd already taught all of his kids how to ride, his grandkids, he couldn't let her go either. But she had a filly, and his son-in-law had sold it to a guy he worked with down at Valiant. And ironically, that guy lived close to Gilbert Jones at Medicine Springs, and only a mile and a half from Gilbert. And he had took that little mare up there, us not knowing anything about this,
Mm-hmm.
until years and years later, and bred to one of Gilbert's stallions, and raised a little mare that the pools called Pretty Girl. In later years, I was able to purchase her from the pools, and I called her Cowboy Bird because her daddy was Cowboy Chief and her mama was Blackbird.
Uh-huh.
And it went back, you know, that was a granddaughter to the first horse that we got when my dad traded the old work mare off, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that we got with our first 40 acres. And so my brother and my dad, they had been going to Medicine Springs, and they knew Gilbert Jones many years before I did. I had heard of him through some friends that lived up there back in the early 60s in 1965. But all I thought it was just kind of a radical old guy up there that lived without electricity and talked about having 100-mile horse races and 50-mile horse races. And I really, you know, thought that he really didn't know what he was talking about, you know. And of course, my brother, he and I were really close, my younger brother, and he was a good horseman and mule man. And he'd say, I don't know, Brian. Said, you know, we ride up there with him, and it's nothing for him to go 35 miles and never get off his horse, you know, and just in a real long trot and all of that. And I said, well, I still don't know how you can run a 50-mile horse race or a 100-mile horse race. And so finally, when I broke down, after I'd tried Welge horses and different things, you know, I went up there, rode with him, and it didn't take me long to see that he had what I wanted, you know, for my kids, and it was a lot of the descendants of these old horses, like it come out of this family, you know, and the founders of Antlers and the people that lived here on this property, the Farrs, and so it was kind of a good find for me, and Gilbert, he liked the way my kids rode horses, and he said if they'll ride one of my horses in these races, I'll give them a horse. I'll give them a nice colt every time they ride one. If they just take care of it and do respectable, you know, in the races, I'll either pay them or give them a colt, you know. So that's what we started doing, and I started selling quarter horses and trading registered quarter horses, and I had a rodeo family that lived in the mountains that was really big in roping and working cattle, and they liked the kind of horses I had, and they had 3 Choctaw mares that I wanted something awful, and people thought I was off my rocker, you know, because I traded straight across my registered quarter horse mares for the Choctaw mares. But
what was their names? Rodeo family.
The
rodeo
family.
Yeah, the family.
It was Johnny Self's family.
Okay.
And he had a boy that was one of the best team ropers that ever come from this part of the country, you know. Well, anywhere in the state probably, you know. And they had a long history. His daddy was just a few years older than Gilbert Jones, and he had this one little mare called the Black Jug, no, the Brown Jug. And her mane was so long she'd step on it when she walked.
Really?
And her tail would drag her, you know, just drag the ground like they called them broom tails, you know. And she was the mother of these 3 mares that I was trading for. I never did get her, you know. But Earl Self, he said, son, said, I'll tell you about that little mare. Said, I don't want to ever get rid of her, but said, all she's ever done is run in those mountains and raise babies. But said, she's 22 years old right now. She's never seen 200 pounds of grain in her whole life, and she's raised me 19 good babies, you know. and so just running in the mountains, taking care of herself, you know. And that's remarkable. That's what these horses do. They could just run up there, and they most of those came from different families. The Choctaw people, the Chickasaw people. That there were some horses already here before the removal of the eastern tribes here, but those families, when they came here, and then they were forced into taking allotments, and they couldn't run their horses and cattle in common, and they started being taxed on their land, which was never not supposed to be. They just kind of gave up and moved to corporate America, and became very successful business people. Most of them did, you know. But they thought enough of their little horses and their mule-footed hogs that they just left them in the mountains and just left them running because they knew they could take care of themselves. History had showed them that, you know. They live off of anything, whatever's there. They're going to make do, and they'll still go do a day's work for you. And so those little horses for a long time were there with nobody seeing after them or taking care of them. Not many people did. They just took them for granted.
Sure.
And they were just, and some of the cowmen, they were just sure enough a pain in their back. You know, they didn't like them being there because they competed with the cattle for grass.
Sure.
And the salt, whatever salt was put out, you know. Well, when Gilbert Jones came here, like in 1950, from Horse Peak, New Mexico. Of course, Gilbert was born on the Chisholm Trail at Waurika, Oklahoma.
Was? Oh, really?
And his dad had drawn right there at Hastings, had drawn 160 acres in the lottery system back during the land run days, you know. And but but Gilbert wasn't too pleased with that. His dad won it in a drawing, you know. But he had a cousin that rode a horse called Old Harry that was a Comanche buffalo horse that he won 160 acres for his widowed mother in the land run,
I see.
in the actual run.
Huh.
And he was, Gilbert, that old horse, he was crazy about him because Old Harry come from the Comanche Indians and he was known as a buffalo horse. And he liked that, and he liked his I guess his aunt's place a whole lot more than he liked his dad's, you know, because they won theirs in a horse race, not in a drawing. and that was kind of him.
That gave him some spark there because he found that fascinating.
And but he had wrote a history about this horse, and he wrote in there that something H.O. Case had won 160. His cousin had won 160 acres for his widowed mother in the land run. Said Old Harry was a Comanche buffalo horse. He could run over a jackrabbit on the prairie, and he could hold his speed for miles, you know. And then there was an old Chickasaw mare they called Old Nail, and they said that they had raced her to a buggy many times if their folks didn't know it, like coming home from church or different things, you know. And said she never was outrun to a buggy, and said as many kids that could pile on her could ride her. Well, he really liked his uncles and aunts' horses, and when he was 9 years old, they gave him the first colt. Old Harry was foaled in 1887, and Old Nail I think was around 1890, and he got the first colt, a little mare called Susie. And when they left the Wairika area there at Hastings, when they decided to move on out of Oklahoma because he wasn't happy there, and so his daddy said, "Well, we'll move on down to the Brazos and in Texas." And he rode that little mare bareback, and he rode her from there to Seagraves, Texas, and then from there on to New Mexico, you know.
Wow.
And he rode her bareback, and he said she wasn't broke when we left, but the time we got there, she was a pretty good horse, you know. And so a lot of the horses that we have today are descendants of those very horses there, and not the Choctaw horses and not the Chickasaw horses, because we know Old Nail was half Comanche. I mean, his first horse Susie was half Comanche. But they were all Spanish, and what we really treasure and value, Gilbert wasn't too keen on getting these horses blood typed or DNA tested, and because he said, I don't know what they're going to compare it to, and if they're comparing it to the horses that's in Portugal and in Spain or North Africa right now, he said those horses that's there now wasn't the same as what they was 500 years ago, and he said, so I don't believe in their work, you know. Of course, he didn't know that what you could do with DNA. You could find bones of something 1,000 years ago and get the DNA from it, you know. And what we have discovered through, and he was very proud of this. He took a lot of pride in it in later years. He wasn't high on it at first, but once he found out what they said about his horses, he was really high on it. The first thing it was said, and it was good enough for him, it didn't need no blood tapping. Bob Denhart told him in 1972, that's right about when I started buying all my quarter horses, but he was in Porterville, California at one of the meetings of the Spanish Mustang Registry, and Bob Denhart that founded the American Quarter Horse breed, and told him, he said, Jones, he said, you have a genetic treasure there in those mountains there in southeastern Oklahoma. Whatever you do, don't ever let anybody convince you to breed anything into those horses to improve them. Now, that is what we have so-called done to develop the American quarter horse. You know, we bred the Spanish horses to our European and steel dust type horses, you know, and we've developed that breed. But the kind you have, that no longer exists anywhere, especially in a free roaming state like yours do. Well, that was good enough for Gilbert Jones because he thought Bob Denhart, and he was a equine expert if there ever was one, you know. and he wrote books on the foundation of the American Quarter Horse, and we've got the books, that Denhart wrote. And so later years when they were saying, we need to blood type these horses, we need to do this and do that, he said, I know what they are. I know the history. I know the people I got them from. I got them, everything I've got came from an Indian tribe or an old rancher, an old South Texas rancher or ranchers here in Oklahoma. And Indian families that verify what they are. And I've even got affidavits from some of those people that tells what they were, And so that history, their conformation, their temperament, what I say about them, I've studied these horses all my life, and I know they're what I want, and they're Spanish horses. Well, Dr. Sponenberg, that teaches at the University of Virginia and Maryland Tech, knew Gilbert before I did. Since that time, since 1978, he and I have become really, really good friends, and he still teaches pathology there. He's actually been a dean of students as a fill-in a time or two, but and he was very influential. My kids looked up to him, and my son that's a doctor now at Vanderbilt. Dr. Sponenberg was the inspiration for him, and he wanted to be a vet like him when he started, and then he ended up switching over to the to the human side of it,
Okay.
And but anyway, Dr. Sponenberg, he said, well, Gus Cothran, that's at the Gluck Research Center, University of Kentucky, or at Lexington, Kentucky, said he wants to do some DNA work and blood tapping and all that of the wild BLM horses, of the different Mustang registries and different things, and he wants to get a composite and see what the similarities and all of that of what we're calling our American Mustangs today, what they are, and everything. And so Gilbert said, well, if Bryant wants to fool with it, said, I'll go along with it, but I just don't hold a whole lot of faith and stock in the blood typing and all, because I don't know what you're comparing it to, But he said, well, we can see what the difference is in some of the Mustang registries and the BLM horses and all of that, and we could possibly rule something out. Well, what they did, they in his horses, they did find one thoroughbred marker, and I have said before they didn't find any, but they had one horse that they found a thoroughbred marker in. Don't have any idea where it come from, but a neighbor hauled the horse to Gilbert and told him what mare it was out of, and it was one of Gilbert's old mares, Well, now we wonder for sure if that horse was actually one of his or not. We don't really think it was, but it did have a thoroughbred marker, and that was the only one that did. And the rest of them, what they done, they ruled out Percheron, any draft blood. They ruled out any European thoroughbred blood. They ruled out any British pony Shetland blood, So what was left was all Spanish markers. They would either check generic or all Spanish, And that was the only herd of horses in the United States that checked like that.
And what year was this was done, do you recall?
This was done, I think, about 1984.
Okay.
The first time it was done. And then we did it again in, after that Hidalgo movie came out, Portugal requested that we test, they wanted hair follicles from some of the horses. And they went through Dr. Sponenberg and Dr. Cothran, and I was taking a load of horses to Morristown, Vermont, stopped to rest them at Blacksburg, Virginia, where he was, and he pulled hair out of all of those main samples, and then I pulled 60-something more, of horses at home. Now, on the blood typing, he actually came and drawed all the blood, come from Virginia here and drawed the blood, and then sent it to Cothran himself. On the hair follicles, he pulled it on like 7 head, and then I pulled it on 66 or something like that. And then I sent them to him, and then he sent it on to Dr. Cothran. Well, in the meantime, I was taking those horses to John Fusco, the one that had done the Spirit movie for the little kids, the animated movie, Spirit of the Cimarron.
Oh, yeah.
Of which he was awarded Oklahoma Western Heritage Award at the Cowboy Hall of Fame there in Oklahoma City, and my wife and I were his guests when he received that award, and we were really proud to be there, you know, to do that. And we had took him 7 horses to his place in Vermont, and so. Let's see.
Well, with the follicles and the
when we was doing that, Dr. Cothran was hard away from the Gluck Research Center there in Kentucky, which we thought that was most elite research center for horse people of any place. But Texas A&M got him, and we found out later what the deal was. You know, our people like Cody Old and Trevor Brazil and Charmaine James and the owners of Doc's Little Lena, world champion cutting horses, world champion roping horses, world champion barrel racing horses. Guess what? They didn't want to get any more of them like they got those. They wanted them cloned. So the leading geneticist in the nation, which was Dr. Gus Cothran, that had found out all this stuff and verified what Bob Denhart had said in 1972. Well, in '84, he verified it with his blood work. He said, "Hey, these horses are very, very unique. Jones, you have a genetic treasure here, you know." And well, that's what Denhart said, and Sponenberg's always said that. Well, you know, I've always said that too. I knowed what I had because I spent my life getting them. Now people want to criticize me because I tell them, well, now that's absolutely one of the very best one I ever raised. He said, well, I've been doing it for 70 years. Why shouldn't it be the best one I ever raised? I said, why would I want to keep something that ain't some of the best I ever raised, you know? And he kind of had a point, you know.
Sure.
And so to him, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. We all know that. And I'll say, as being an ag teacher, people around in this area, they respected me. I had a 5-0 offer for a job right here in Rattan, and they loved to show animals and things like that, you know. Some of the people right here in this area didn't like the horses being up there because it competed with their cattle, but they knew I knew horses and I knew show animals. So they didn't think I was completely off my rocker, but they couldn't see what I saw in those little horses. And Hugo, I never was ever close to, you know, losing my job or anything like that. We always did very, very well with our show hogs and lambs and cattle and everything. So they'd say, Bryant, man, said, you got an eye for livestock, you know, and everything, but why in the world don't you want to improve them little old Choctaw horses? Why don't you want to? I said, well, what do you mean improve them? I said, I can't find any more good Choctaw studs. Hell, I ain't talking about no Choctaw stud. I'm talking about getting you a good quarter horse and breeding them, or get you a Peruvian or Andalusian, you know, and get them bigger and get them mezzanine. I said, I don't want to make them something that they're not. I want them to be what Mother Nature's made them. I believe like Gilbert Jones did, let Mother Nature do the culling, and Mother Nature tell you what's the best, you know. Now, I said, I guarantee, you know, phenotype-wise, they're not going to win a halter show. But I'll challenge any of you to get your best quarter horse that you got, and you just, we'll run from Comanche River to Little River and back, or we'll run from here to Cloudy, Oklahoma and back, or to the Arkansas line and back. See if you can stay anywhere close to me, you know. And they'd say, well, nobody needs a horse to do that anymore. We got cars and trucks and things to go places and do things, so it's not like it used to be. And I said, well, there's a thing called culture, and things becoming extinct, you know, completely losing a species or a bloodline. And I said, these were on the verge of that happening, and we can't let that happen, you know. And I said, well, you could just raise a whole lot better looking horse. In your eyes, it would be a better looking horse. But to me, I appreciate the beauty of the original Indian horse. You know, there's something special about them, and that's what I rode when I was a kid. I was intimidated because I had to ride one of them, I couldn't wait till I got me some of your good, big, nice, halter-looking quarter horses. And then I realized when I was trying to put my kids on those horses, hey, I had the horse I wanted back then, and I didn't realize it. The horses that my dad had, and I thought we had them because we couldn't afford anything else, because they were a dime a dozen back then, you know, $40, $50 at a sale barn. You could buy your best Choctaw horse going, you know. But nearly all of these old people that got big into the quarter horses, they'll turn right around and tell you, you know, the best horse I ever rode one of the little Choctaws. Now he wouldn't weigh over 850 pounds, but I could rope a 1,500-pound steer, 4 or 5 year old steer off of him. Now the first one I roped, yanked him off his feet, but said he ain't been yanked off his feet since, you know. And then they'd tell you all the things they could do. They could pack deer on them. They could pack a wild hog on them. The man that actually lived here at this house right here brought one of the biggest, according to Bo Winters, one of the biggest rattlesnakes that anybody had ever seen in this country, across one of them little horses right up through here.
Oh,
you
really?
know? So
how long was the snake? Do you recall?
They said he was close to a 7-foot snake.
Oh my word!
We killed a 6-foot 9.5-inch one, you know, and my little granddaughter was going to school up at Rochester, Minnesota at that time. My son was a medical doctor there at Mayo Clinic, and she had to do a report on reptiles, and hers was a rattlesnake. And of course, she knew that I had this big walnut board, you know, that was like a 12-inch board. The snake measured 10.5 inches around its circumference.
Wow.
And 6 foot 9.5 inches long, not counting his rattlers. He only had 7 rattlers because they had been broke off. And he measured 3.5 inches between his eyes. Had 3/4 inch fangs.
That's huge.
And I mounted all of them on a board. And one of my students, who was my cousin, mounted him on this big walnut board for him, and we hung him in our living room. Well, my little granddaughter, she wanted to know if she could borrow that snake hide for her display, and of course she took it and she made a great grade on it. And got a brag on her. She's in the 10th grade now. Lives at Franklin, Tennessee. Just took her ACT test. She scored 34 on it.
Oh wow! That's pretty good. That's excellent.
Yes. And so proud of her, and she's the one that still got my snake hide. You know,
hasn't made it back yet.
And I don't. As long as she wants it, it's hers.
Yeah.
But I killed that old snake by accident. But it kind of brings up a Gilbert Jones story. I hope you can.
Oh yeah. Well, no, this is
this.
perfect. And go ahead.
We were over by Cloudy, and we were. Gilbert Jones and a boy I raised, Jesse Ellis. I sent him to school. He lived with me for 5 years, you know. A kid from Hugo, and ended up making a Marine, doing 3 hitches overseas, you know, and just done really great working in Paris, Texas now. But we were together, and we were driving down this little mountain road, mountain trail, looking for horses. And Gilbert's pretty much a naturalist, but now at one time he was a taxidermist.
Oh really?
And he felt like that he had done some injustice to some different species and things by mounting some things like golden eagles and all when he lived in New Mexico that he shouldn't have done, and so he got to where he really was conscious about not killing anything, you know. And so we're driving along, and these old bitterweeds are on each side of the log road, just a little bit of a path where your tars would run. Well, I see this brown deal sticking up, leaned out over the trail there, and I pull up and stop. Gilbert says, do you see a horse? I don't see any horses around here. I said, no, Gilbert, there's a big rattlesnake right there in front of us. He says, a rattlesnake? He said, how can you see a rattlesnake in these weeds? I said, right there. He said, see it brown right here on this side? Well, I see a pine limb sticking up there. I said, that's not a pine limb, Gilbert. That's a rattlesnake. I think this was in '95. And I've got the date on my plate, you know, where we had him mounted. And he said, well, if that's a snake, that's one of the biggest ones I ever seen in this country. He said, now, I've mounted some awful big ones out around the Cap Rock, you know, and all. You know, I've mounted 8-foot diamondbacks, black color and all that, you know. But, well, I get out, and I had a pistol, a 45, no U.S. 1917 Cavalry pistol, and I had fully intended to shoot him, and he just crawled back over off the road there a little bit and got up under a little pine. It was a pine plantation there, and he called up, and I'd had a kid in school that had showed me how you could just take, and some of those old rattlesnakes, you can kind of scratch them with a limb, just reach over there and on the back of the neck, and they'd just bury their head down, you know. They kind of saw, you know, like, and I don't know what made me do this. If I had ever thought about it again, I probably wouldn't have done it. But the pine limb I had wouldn't have started to kill him because it was rotten, you know. And so the old snake put his head down in his collar. He wasn't rattling, and I got it over in this hand. And I kept scratching his head there, and I just kind of went around and got right behind the base of his neck, and picked him up. And I had my hand in my belt right here like this, and his body was here, and I was holding him at the base of the head. And Gilbert, I walked around in front of my little pickup. Gilbert said, "Well, you didn't shoot that thing." He said, "Is that damn thing still alive?" And I said, "Yeah, it's alive." He said, "Man, what are you doing?" He said, "If he was to bite you, we couldn't get you out of these mountains quick enough." Said, "That thing's old as Methuselah, you know." Said, "Well, you'd die instantly." Said, "I'd blowed his head off, you know." And we're sitting there talking, and old snake's just flopping around, you know, kind of wrapped around me. And I'm holding, he's sitting there. We're in a little Nissan pickup, 2-seater, and or like a one seat in the back of it. Jesse's back there, and he'd got out at that time. And well, anyway, we're talking, and I'm holding an old snake by the base of the head, and just all at once, he'd pull around, you know. I wasn't holding him tight here at all, you know. He was just laying in that area there, and he'd pull himself around, like trying to get loose, and I could feel he was pulling up here on his head, and all at once I felt the life just go out of that snake, and I know I was probably scared, and I was holding real tight at the base of his neck with my thumb and my forefinger there, and he unjointed his neck. Is what he done. He broke his own neck.
Oh,
you know,
really?
Me holding him there like that, and I mean he just. That was it. Just died.
I'll be darned.
And so Gilbert said, and I said, "Well, he's dead, Gilbert. He died." He said, "He did." He said, well, I said, so I told him what happened, and I put him in the pickup. We started driving up the mountain there, going toward Blue Hole, and we were only like 2 miles out of Cloudy from the Cloudy store. And in the snake, I couldn't tell what kind he was. He didn't have the rings. He wasn't a velvet tail, and he didn't have the rings go all the way around his tail. There were irregular rings on it. And the old guy that run the store there, he was an old man, been there a long time. He said he was a cross between a timber rattler and a diamondback, you know. And but anyway, we're going up the mountain there. We hadn't went a quarter of a mile. Gilbert says, "Do you think we've lost any horses to that old snake like that?" And I said, "Well, Gilbert, and I don't really know." I said, "We wouldn't have any way of knowing. You know, we have some come up missing sometimes, or we'll find one dead, but we don't know if it's been shot or what's happened to it, you know." But Wilbur Thurman said that he'd lost one to a snake bite. A rattlesnake had bit one, you know, one time. "But you don't know of any we've lost?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, now I'm not talking about men, but said, is there any women or kids that's been bit by one that might have died or had to go to the hospital or anything?" I said, "No, I hadn't heard of any around over here and all that." He said, "Well, now if there ain't no horses died from them, there ain't no women or kids been bit over in here, why in the hell did you have to kill that old snake? Hell, he's old as I was. You know, if man would just leave them alone," said they'd be here forever. Said, you know, said they're just like an old tree. If lightning don't get it or a fire or something, said they'll just last and last. And said, that old snake, I'm satisfied, has been here in these mountains a lot longer than I have. And said, now you went and killed it. And I said, "Well, Gilbert, I didn't mean to." He said, "Well, if you'd just left him alone, you wouldn't have had to, you know." And so I mean, he really got aggravated at me over
Yeah.
that, you know. And there's another time he done the same thing with my brother-in-law, and it was a 4.5 foot velvet tail right by his house. And we was cleaning up, getting ready for one of our trail rides, our meetings there. And he says, and he was cleaning the pathway out to Gilbert's outhouse, you know, and he had a 500-gallon propane tank there, and that old rattlesnake was laying under that propane tank because that cool off that propane, you know, in a real hot time of the year. And so when he killed it, boy, Gilbert come out there and he told him, he said, "Now," and he's my wife's brother, and he said, "Now get in," said, "Now I know you're thought well of around here," and said, "I appreciate you and your kids riding my horses in these races and proving what they can do. But," said, now what business you have killing that old snake?" He said, "Those snakes don't hurt anybody." Said, "I've lived here all this time." Said, "All they are, they're up here around these old buildings trying to catch these mountain mice." So that's the only reason it's there. And he said, Now that snake's home, and that's not yours. Said, "You live off down there South Antlers, down by where I lived." And Rodney, he knew he was in trouble, and he says, "Well, Gilbert," he said, "all I was doing," said, "I was kind of thinking about what I've heard you say lots of times, you know." And "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, you always say that any morning that you get up here in these mountains, that there's some SOB that needs killing. There's some man that needs killing." Said that they've been messing with your horses, they've been shooting them or doing something or burning the timber when they shouldn't, and doing this or that, and said, "But you've always said that if a man done anything to harm a woman or a kid, they're gonna burn in hellfire for sure." And Gilbert says, "Well, that's right, but," said, "now what's that got to do with anything, Rodney?" He says, "Well, you know, our ride's coming up in 2 weeks, and that's why we're up here cleaning this up." And so I just got to thinking, that old snake laying here like that, there might be a woman or something wanting to go use your outhouse and walk by there and get bit. "Well, now since you put it that way," said, "now I know you're right. I know you're right. But," said, "I don't want no woman or no kid to get bit, because," said, "I know, boy, you know, so if you're a party to that, so that's the worst thing in the world a man can do." But said, "Now, but now I'll tell you what, if you ever have to kill another one, don't even tell me about it. You make sure that nobody even tells me about it, because I don't want to know it." Said, "Now, because if you tell me, so I'm going to get madder than hell now."
Yeah.
Said, "Now, just don't even tell me if you have to kill another one." You know, so.
Well, now you'd met Gilbert getting a horse from him for your starting with your kids. But did that started your relationship from that point on, or did you really get to know him? I know about 1980 is when you started having a friendship with Gilbert, but how did that?
That's when we had our first 50-mile race. Yeah, the first time I came and saw Gilbert, he said, "Well, now I'll tell you what now." So I sure think a lot of your mom and dad. So I've known them a long time. So I think a lot of your brother Milton. Said, "I ain't struck a better mule man or better hand with these horses up here in these mountains since I've been here than your brother." And said, "They tell me you teach agriculture down there at Hugo." And I said, "Yeah, I do, you know." I said, "I've taught there for a few years now." And I said, I think I've been there about eight or 9 years when we were talking about that. And he said, "Well, what do you think about Frank Hopkins?" And I said, "Frank Hopkins, does he live around here?" No, Frank Hopkins, the greatest endurance rider that ever lived." I said, "I've never heard of him." "You're an agriculture man and you ain't never heard of Frank Hopkins?" "Well, man, he's the best. He's run 400 races, and boy, he started dragging out these books. Den Hart, Don Worcester over there, and American Paint Horse Deal, the Arabian books, the man that was president of the Arabian Horse Registry for 26 years, he talked about him, Frank Hopkins, and all, you know. And of course, later on, you know, there's a big disagreement on the History Channel whether he ever run a race or not, you know. But all these other authors said he did, and Gilbert said since he was 17 years old that Frank Hopkins had been his hero. Well, that made me think he was for real. So he said, now this brings up another thing. Said, now your brother tells me that you don't think that we can run a 50-mile horse race up here in these mountains, much less a 100-mile race. And I said, well, to tell you the truth, I don't really think you can without hurting a horse. And he said, well, I said, Hopkins did it all the time. And he said, there's been many a time I rode a horse 50 miles in a day up here in these mountains. Said, now I ain't never raced nobody 50 miles, but said, I rode them 50 miles, and I brought them home, and they was in good shape, and I rode them the next day, you know. And said, many a time I've had a saddle on them all day long, you know. He said, I know that these horses can still do what their ancestors done. He said, well, there is a known fact, if an Indian got 2 or 3 miles lead on the cavalry or on anybody, or if they got 3 minutes ahead of them, they wasn't ever going to catch them. They wasn't just going to catch them, you know. And said, these horses are the same horses. I've been breeding them all my life. And said they can still do that with the right horsemanship, the right conditioning, the right care. Said they can still do that. Well, some of these stallions up here, you could catch him right off a band of mares if it's broke to ride, and you could ride him 100 miles in a day. And he said, I have no doubt. And he started, all this time I'm looking at these books that he's laid out there to me. And I'd seen where the Romans had run them to death, you know, run them like 150 miles in a day until it killed it. And that's why they checked their endurance. Well, Gilbert didn't believe in that, you know, in hurting one. And so after I looked at all that stuff, I said, well, I guess I've been wrong. I said, but my little mare, I said, I've had a little Choctaw mare all my life, and I did for many years. And I said, my dad would always say, be careful, don't run her too far, don't hurt her, don't road found her or anything. Well, he'd just been overly cautious. He knew how much the little mare meant to you, and he didn't want to make sure you didn't hurt her, you know. But said it wasn't because she couldn't do it, because she could. If she's all Choctaw, she could have done it. So anyway, I finally agreed with him, and he wanted to know if I'd help put on a race and all, and I told him I would. So they started the races in the 80s. And his son-in-law was helping him, Bob Ely, out of Albuquerque. He helped Gilbert really. He's helped him do the first races probably more than anybody, you know. But our kids was riding them and started riding his horses. We started out riding some that was like half quarter horse and half Choctaw, and then we switched over to his. It was the pure bloods, you know, and that's how we got the foundation of some of the horses we have today, you know, was what the kids did, you know, riding in those races and all for so many years.
And how long were the races?
We started out when my kids was like 5 and 6 years old. They were running 9-mile races. Then we went to a 12-mile race, but add just a little more to it, just checking to see what they could do. And then we went to a 15-mile race. Then we went to a 25-mile race. And then every October, the standard thing was a 50-mile race. And later years, we started inviting the AERC, the American Endurance Riding Conference, to come. Gilbert's races was faster than what they did because they had more vet checks and all. Gilbert just had old timers, Indians or old ranchers, that would call the shots if they said that horse has had enough. It wasn't no question about it. Gilbert Jones says, if he says that horse is done, he's done. If you ride him another step further, you'll never be welcome at Medicine Springs again. He better not ever show foot on this mountain, you know. And so I mean he run things with a tight rein, a tight fist, you know. And we didn't have vets. Well, later years we ended up getting vets, you know, to make sure, because we started seeing how you could have problems. Because there was a deal at Catoosa in 1987 where a lot of horses died.
Oh, really? And
none of ours did. But the best Arabians, thoroughbred, Tennessee walkers,
wow,
quarter horses. I mean, it made national news. It was all in the Tulsa World, the Daily Oklahoman, and we had run there in '86, and it had my nephew on his Mustang horse holding up $50 $100 bills, and the headline to Tulsa World was, "Boy in his Mustang raced to win 5,000." You know, that was the Tulsa headlines, Tulsa World. Well, that guy said he was going to do the race in June of '87 and have it call it Catoosa Days and have a comeback because Herb McSpadden, which was Clem McSpadden's kin, and kin to Will Rogers, you know, had a 100-mile horse race, and back in the 30s, 39 I think, and a horse, a little black and white Choctaw horse from down on the Red River, won the race, and
Really?
and his name was Crazy Snake, you know, and so this guy named McAnally was going to try to redo that and try to get something going for Catoosa that would be an annual thing, you know. And I told him in November, I said, now Bill, I said, now we never have run for money before, but because we just run just to prove that our horses was worth their salt and worth the grass and the air that they breathed and the grass they ate. And a lot of people don't think they are, but that's why we're here, you know. But we had to pay $100 entry fees, and we never had done that before. And then the winners was going to get the money. And I said, if you run that race in June, like you run this one here in November, I said, you're going to kill some horses. And so anyway, they sent us out a deal saying, if you think you're tough, if you think your horse is tough, if you want to prove their worth or their value, come to this race, $100 deal, and then they're going to have a 15-mile, a 25-mile, a 50-mile, and a 100-mile.
Oh my word!
And this was June the 13th of 1987, and they got Rogers County court records are full of it. what happened there that day?
Oh, I'm sure.
My son starts at daylight. He starts the 100-mile race on Bandito Gold. He never had been outrun on Bandito Gold ever. And it was Gilbert. Gilbert thought he was the best endurance horse that ever lived. And he had a 7/8 brother, 7/8 the same blood, that was younger than him, that Gilbert picked out for my son, and he named him, guess what, Hidalgo. He was a Palomino paint, and he said, I don't think there's a horse in the world that can touch this horse that running in these mountains, you know. And a race running these mountains. So we took, to the first race, we only took 3 horses. No, and we was first, second, and fourth. And this race in June, when I was worried about the heat, and rightfully so, because it was 110 degrees that day, and it was 92% humidity.
Oh no!
And my son started early before daylight. Then 30 minutes later, they started the 50-mile horses. My sister-in-law, when I was married to Rodney, that I told you about the rattlesnake story, she started next on the 50. And then I had a niece and a nephew that started the 25 30 minutes later. And then by the time it was time for my daughter and another nephew to take off, which was on our fastest horses that had won most of the races, the shorter distance races anywhere that they ever ran. We knew we had that one. But we started getting reports back that there were horses down along the race course.
Oh, really?
Because we run down the vertigress navigation system under the Will Rogers Turnpike and made a 12.5-mile circle back to the point of beginning. So that's 25 miles every time you made a deal, you know. And my 100-mile boy was going to have to do that 4 times, you know. And and that guy did. He remembered what I had told him, and I reiterated it that morning. And he told everybody, nobody knows your horse like you do, you know. Ride your horse according to the conditions. It's hot, it's humid. Don't hurt your horse, you know. Do it. But everybody did. They had records, I think, of 19.
I need to change dates. Hold that thought. 19.